Hi, Easy here. Welcome to another video for 3.11 Harvest League. I think this will mark the start of my ascendancy carousel, which is basically I'll make a build for every single ascendancy throughout the Harvest League. And I'm hoping that by forcing myself to kind of think diversely, I'll prevent myself from burning out by playing the same kind of builds over and over again. I'm not guaranteeing any successes here, and I'm also open to any ideas and suggestions that you guys might have. But I'm definitely looking forward to theory crafting a build for every single ascendancy so that it fits kind of the theme of what each class and ascendancy is trying to achieve. And the first thing that we're going to start out with is a bleed bow gladiator, which is not original by any means, but like I mentioned in the previous video, I got a Ricelothes coil as a random drop, and this is pretty expensive and pretty good belt for bleed bows or bleed builds in particular. So I decided to give it a try. I don't have any other uniques or anything that would be used in a regular bow bleed build. So my damage output is quite low in comparison to what it could be, especially because it's in solo self-found. I don't have access to a lot of currency or gear that normal people would, but we'll go ahead and run a T11 atoll map. We'll go ahead and check out this fall area, and as you can see, being a gladiator and having being a gladiator and focusing on bleed, you get to take advantage of the bleed pops. And the bleed pops are one of the easiest ways to acquire enemies explode on kill effect, which is something that's usually reserved for very exclusive mechanics, such as chest pieces. Eye level 85 Crusader chest pieces with an extremely low chance to get the enemies explode on kill. Previously you had synthesis implicits, which are also hard to get. So it's a rare source, and gladiators get to take advantage of it starting from like level 55. I'm not sure when you get the second ascendancy, but yeah, you get access to it very early. It's extremely strong for clears, extremely strong defensively, because it gets rid of things like porcupines and other on-death mechanics. And it also helps with single target sometimes, especially when your rares have a lot of trash mobs around them, or if you if it constantly spawns additional mobs. So I think Gladiator is one of the strongest ascendancies that you can start out with, and also scales extremely well with things like cluster jewels and damage over time multi from your bows and quivers and your amulet. There's a lot of source of those that you can push when you're trying to go for really end game gearing. I don't have access to a lot of those. In fact, even my weapon is pretty mediocre, nothing too special. But given that it's solo self-found and I've been tackling tier 15, tier 16 maps, even if they're a little bit slow, shows like the survivability and the durability of this build. I have 5.5k life with pretty mediocre gear all around. I don't really have anything with like extremely high life totals. I don't really have anything with very high it's just generic gear that you get from leveling, and a little bit of targeted crafting for resistances. In fact, I was using gold rim for almost until I was like 75-ish. So in terms of defense, this build is extremely strong. It has high armor, almost 90% physical damage reduction from having all those endurance charges, as well as I forgot what the ascendancy is called, as well as this right here, outmatch and outlast. 10% reduced physical damage taken while at maximum endurance charges. And because we're using enduring cry with the instant enduring cry, we get a lot of regen from having Enduring Cry, we get perma endurance charges, and we can also tack on Frenzy and just cast it every now and then to get the effect of the 10% physical damage bonus. So overall, it's a very well-rounded build that's been designed to hit almost every single checkmark that you want from a build in general. The only lacking aspect, I would say, is outside of the pops. Skills like Split Arrow and Puncture are not very revolutionary in terms of the visual aspect. It's literally just arrows, and Puncture is a red arrow, so nothing too fancy or eye-catching there. But I think overall this build is one of the strongest builds that you can run at any currency level. I'll quickly go over my gear. We'll go into passive tree in a bit, but I want to first cover just the general gear. So I have a Citadel bow, eye level 79 with about 270 physical DPS, and this is pretty trash. Well, just straight up, it's pretty bad. It does have the 50% increased damage with bleeding, but everything else is really, really bad because it doesn't have the 60% chance to deal 100% more damage with bleeding. And how bleed mechanic works is that unless you have Crimson Dance, which is this keystone right here, the enemy will only have one bleed active at any given time. They can have multiple bleeds on them, but only the strongest one applies. And by having that 60% chance to deal 100% more damage with bleeds modifier from the Elder influence, that basically equates to 100% more damage in general because it always applies the strongest bleed. So even if you hit 3 times and only one of them got the effect of that 100% more damage bleed, that's what's going to show up, and that's what's going to deal damage to the enemy. So if you have that mod, even if it's a crappy one, let me check. Let's check what eye level you get that at. We go to PoE DB and two-handed weapon bows, and then we can go to Elder prefix chance for bleeding. You need to be item level 83 to get this mod on your weapon, and just having this mod alone will be significantly better than whatever I have right now. And that's one of the big hurdles that I have to get past. I have to be able to tackle Elder content, but I don't have enough damage to tackle Elder content without more investment into getting better gear, like maybe a 6th link, etc, etc. So that's where the struggle comes in, is scaling our damage without having access to the actual items. And this is a solo self-found problem. It's not, you can just buy a base eye level 83 Citadel Elder bow for probably not too expensive. So this is exclusively a solo self-found problem, but it's a 5 link that I got not using fusings but using harvest crafts. Both my chest and my bow are from that. The links are nothing special. We have Swift Affliction, but I want to replace it with Chance to Bleed in the future because it turned out to be a higher Chance to Bleed turned out to be better according to Path of Building. For our helm, we're using a Starkondra's Head to meet the dexterity requirements. None of the other stats are really that important. It's just dexterity and life, really. Our chest piece is a Lion Eyes Vision. I got this. You might say, oh, that's a rare item. How'd you get that in solo self-found? Well, there's a card that you can farm, a divination card that you can farm called the Lion. It's this one right here. And the Lion can drop from Glacier, Caldera, or Mud Flats. And this Mud Flats is the Act 6 version of Mud Flats, where you have to kill that really red-looking enemy. Her name is like Vindicated Queen, right? And you can run that zone over and over and over again and farm up these cards. And what it will give you are these following items: Lionized Glare, Remorse, Fall, Pause, and Vision. So I farmed up about 5 or 6 sets of these, and I got like 2 chest pieces, a weapon, and like 2 shields, right? What I was aiming for is this jewel, and we'll cover this jewel in a second. But yeah, that's where I got the chest piece. It's not too difficult. Just make sure you turn it in with a higher level character, so you get you can get 6 sockets on it naturally. But yeah, that's where we're sitting. I have puncture in my bow, and then I have split arrow in my chest piece, because our chest comes with a level 15 pierce, allowing us to skip on things like chain and fork on our split arrow. Now I would prefer to have chain instead of pierce, but it would also mean that I need a 5 link and an actual decent chest piece as well. So I just didn't bother. And Lionized Vision comes with the benefit that it's a 160 strength, but also 160 dex chest piece, meaning that you can easily get the green, 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 red, red socket colors. So that's where our 2 5 links are. For our gloves, this is a leftover from my other character. All it really has is a high amount of dex, some lightning res, and life. For our boots, we have life, lightning res, and fire res, as well as 30% movement speed. Our rings are nothing exceptional. In fact, I forgot to craft life on this one. It's just intelligence and some elemental resistances. Once again, life, a little bit of elemental resistance, and cold res. And our quiver, life and resistances. That's all of this gear. That's all it really is. Our belt is a right slothless coil. The way that this belt works is that it increases the range that your physical damage can deal. So if you look at a weapon like this, it says physical damage 110 to 321 at the very top, under physical damage, under quality. And what this belt does is it increases that range so that it's 30 to 40% less minimum physical damage and 30 to 40% more maximum physical damage. So it increases the range that these values can be. And normally it doesn't really matter because it averages out when you actually look at a large sample size. But when you look at something like bleed, I've mentioned earlier that when we're talking about the weapon, only the highest bleed counts. So if you hit that 30% less minimum physical damage on your first shot, you're going to deal 30% less damage than you would normally if you didn't have this belt. But it also means that if you hit that 30% more maximum physical damage and it goes up to 40%, then you'll be dealing 40% more maximum physical damage than you normally would without this belt. And so it allows us to hit higher numbers. And because bleed applies you can have multiple bleeds and it only applies the highest one, it essentially equates to about 40% more damage. But this is by no means required for the build. In fact, it would be a lot easier to fill out your resistances and your life without it, just using a Stygian Vise or just leather belt, doesn't really matter. This is definitely one of the last items that you should be getting. It just happened that I got this in Solo Self-Found as a natural drop, so that's why I am using it in the first place. Our flasks are nothing really extraordinary. I just have an Enduring Mana Flask for Curse, a Basalt Flask for Poison, and a Granite Flask for Freeze. A Bleeding or Life Flask for Bleeding. I don't even have Bubbling because I ran out of alterations, and an Adrenaline Flask. So it's nothing too crazy. Our links, we have Enlighten. That doesn't matter. I just have it in to gain levels. A Dash, Enduring Cry, and Second Wind to help increase our dash uptime as well as Enduring Cry uptime. We have Flesh and Stone linked to main. So Flesh and Stone, we always keep it at blood because we don't really need the bleed effect, the blind effect from Sand Stance, because we already apply bleed. We already apply blinds with the Ascendancy. So that's that. We also have cast when damage taken with Molten Shell at a very low level, so level 2, and which means the highest level it can be is level 40. But because Molten Shell functions essentially the same way, it just gives you less flat armor than it was if it was level 20. This increases our uptime on Molten Shell and allows us to take more damage from enemies and block more of that with our guard skill more frequently. In our helm we have GMP and Mirage Archer supported to Frenzy and Ensnaring Arrow. So one thing to keep in mind about bleed is that it normally has like a 70% of your hit damage dealt as bleed damage, but this increases to like 210% if the enemy is moving. And normally you would have to force the enemy to move, and bosses like Katava or Uber Elder, if it's in a stationary phase, don't move. But what bow builds have an advantage over melee builds is that they get access to Ensnaring Arrow. And Ensnaring Arrow, the only line that really matters isn't even in the actual the blue text. It's actually in the green text. Ensnared enemies always count as moving. That's the most important one. So as long as you hit an enemy with Ensnaring Arrow and you see the little rope that forms from the enemy to the ground, they will always count as moving, and instead of dealing 70% damage as bleed, it will now deal 210%. I don't know the exact numbers. So bow builds in general, bow bleeds in general have this Ensnaring Arrow to bypass the need to take Crimson Dance. The reason why melee builds have to take Crimson Dance is because in single target, if the boss is not moving, you're dealing essentially like a quarter of your normal damage output. But now that you can deal, you can stack up to enemy 8 times, but your bleeding doesn't deal extra damage while enemies moving, and you deal 50% less damage with bleeding. This basically turns out to be, if you have 8 bleed stacks up on the enemy, it's 280% damage. So it's mostly for bossing at very end game, even for melee builds. But bow builds don't have to worry about that because of the Ensnaring Arrow. We also have Frenzy. This is something that's just tacked on top, so I can get access and take advantage of the 10% more physical damage while at maximum frenzy charges. The 25% chance to gain frenzy charge on kill with main hand weapon, even though bow is a main hand weapon, doesn't actually work because bleed is a damage over time effect, and it doesn't count as us killing it for this purpose specifically. It's kind of confusing. But we have Frenzy. If you are in Trade League, I would highly recommend getting the Maloney's Machinarium, I think it's called. The quiver that fires shit for you with whatever you have in your socket. Just put GMP, Ensnaring Arrow, and Frenzy in there, and you'll have these effects up permanently without having to cast them yourself, which is really good. But outside of that, that's pretty much all the gems and gear. We'll go look at the passive tree real quick. I don't have access to a lot of uniques that you would normally have in Trade League, and that's why I can't utilize Lion Eyes Fall. I showed you this gem earlier very briefly, but Lion Eyes Fall is a jewel that allows you to change melee and melee weapon type modifiers into bow modifiers. So if you take a look at Path of Building, we'll pull up Path of Building here. Right, Path of Building. If you have something like Lion Eyes Fall here, Lion Eyes Fall Viridian Jewel, socket it here, and you hover over these will now affect bow builds. So instead of just affecting axes, all of these nodes will affect bows, which is really nice because these notables at the end have things like 10% damage over multiply for bleeding, attacks have 15% chance to cause bleeding. This one specifically has like bleeding you inflict deals damage 15% faster, as well as having 20% increased damage with ailments, and 30% more increased damage with ailments against bleeding enemies. And so there's a lot of damage that is to be found in these nodes, but they're not bow builds. They're not bow nodes. And the lionized fall allows us to utilize these nodes even while we're a bow build. Another example of where you would use that is with this claw wheel over here. A lot of crit bow builds will put that here and take these nodes, getting you a ton of crit multi, ton of crit chance, as well as having a good source of leech that's not down here. So if we had this, if I pull up my POB, if we had that jewel, our damage output will go from around 250k to about 350k. We'll see. So let's look at puncture, because that's the main skill that we are using, puncture. And you might say, oh, the 50,000 damage, that's terrible. Well, we got to remember the enemy is always moving, enemy is blinded, enemy is maimed. We'll say Cyrus. We also have endurance charges and frenzy charges. And I think that's only thing we need to check. And okay, and we also have pride effect, and this goes up to 39%, but it only shows 19%, so you can expect like 20% more damage there. But if we were to take these two nodes, put in a lion eyes jewel right here, we're gonna go from 180k to 320k, right? And if you have that bow that we talked about with, let's see, bow, we'll say Citadel bow, Elder, we're looking at Elder bows, and have the bleeding effect with 100%, and have a little bit of fizz damage, and a little bit of added fizz. Even something like this, the damage on hit is the same, but if you look at the damage increased, total DPS increase with bleed, it's 50% more, right? So instead of 320k, we go up to almost 500k. And that's where kind of our damage is at right now. Oh, in fact, I forgot to take all these small nodes that I have as well. Okay, so I know we're over points, but essentially that's where we're at. If we didn't have these, we don't have these lion eye fall jewel, so our damage output currently stands at 250k, 240, 230k, you know. If he had the bow, it will go up to 340k, and if he had the jewel, it will go up to 600k, right? So we would nearly triple our damage output with those two items alone, and it's hard to access those items in solo self-found. I think if you were in trade league, you would find significantly more success than I did. And I'm not saying that I didn't find success by any means. In fact, this is probably one of the strongest characters I can tackle and get content with. It's just melee weapon builds and, you know, weapon damage oriented builds do tend to fall off unless you get access to some really nice weapons in terms of damage output. So that's kind of where I'm struggling at. I'm at Awakener level 5. Let me just, yeah, Awakener level 5. I could have killed Cyrus if I wasn't bad at the game. Yeah, I spawned Cyrus and I got him down to like 5%, but I kept dying to his die beam as I walked in. So that's the only problem there. But yeah, this build is like in the current state with 230k DPS. I could have easily taken down Cyrus. It wouldn't have been any fast or any high DPS, but because we're in solo self-found, we do have to make a lot of sacrifices, especially for more defensive layers. But hopefully that kind of gives you insight into what this build is. A little bit of a dissection on how to make a build like this, how the mechanics fit together. But hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. I have no idea what I'm gonna make next. I don't know what my ascendancy of choice will be, but I'm probably gonna do something spell oriented because I haven't done that yet in this league. But yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care.